Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me today as we examine some of the most significant developments shaping American discourse right now. Over the next 50 minutes, I want to walk you through several trending stories that are capturing national attention and explore what they might mean for our country's future. Let me start with what's happening in the political sphere, particularly regarding former President Donald Trump and his potential plans for 2028. Now, we're still in the early stages of President Trump's current term, which began in January 2025, but already there's considerable speculation and discussion about what comes next. The political machinery never stops, and understanding these early signals can tell us a lot about where American politics might be headed. What we're seeing is a fascinating dynamic. Trump's comments about the economy have been generating significant attention, and this makes sense when you consider the economic challenges Americans are facing right now. Inflation, interest rates, employment numbers, these aren't just statistics on a page. They're real factors affecting real families trying to make ends meet, save for retirement, or buy their first home. When a sitting president discusses economic policy and future plans, markets listen, voters listen, and international partners listen. The significance of Trump discussing 2028 at this stage is multifaceted. On one level, it could be seen as forward-thinking leadership, setting a vision for long-term economic recovery and growth. On another level, critics might view it as premature, arguing that the focus should be entirely on the challenges of today rather than campaigns of tomorrow. Both perspectives have merit, and they reflect a deeper tension in American politics about short-term problem-solving versus long-term vision. Let's consider the possible outcomes here. If Trump decides to pursue another term in 2028, assuming constitutional questions about term limits are addressed, this would fundamentally reshape the Republican primary landscape. It would mean other potential candidates would need to decide whether to challenge him or wait until 2032. This kind of decision has ripple effects throughout the entire political ecosystem, affecting fundraising, strategic planning, and party dynamics at every level. But there's another scenario worth considering. These early mentions of 2028 could be strategic positioning that doesn't necessarily translate into an actual campaign. Political figures often use future-focused rhetoric to maintain relevance and influence without committing to specific actions. It keeps supporters engaged and opponents off balance. The impact on Republican Party strategy would be profound either way, as the party would need to either rally around a Trump 2028 vision or begin developing alternative leadership for that cycle. The economic comments from Trump deserve particular attention because they're happening at a critical moment. Americans are feeling economic pressure from multiple directions. Housing affordability remains a crisis in many markets. Student loan debt continues to burden millions of young Americans. Healthcare costs keep rising. When a president addresses these concerns, the specifics matter enormously. Is the focus on tax policy, deregulation, trade agreements, government spending? Each approach has different beneficiaries and different critics.
One possible outcome is that Trump's economic messaging successfully resonates with middle-class voters who feel left behind by previous policies. This could strengthen his political position and create momentum for whatever plans he has, whether for 2028 or for shaping his successor. Another possibility is that the economic situation doesn't improve quickly enough, leading to voter frustration regardless of the messaging. Economic recovery rarely follows political timelines, and that disconnect between economic reality and political necessity creates tension. The international implications are also worth considering. When an American president discusses long-term plans and economic policy, allies and adversaries adjust their strategies accordingly. China, Europe, and other major economic powers are watching these signals to understand American priorities. Will there be continuity in trade policy? What about international agreements and partnerships? These questions affect everything from supply chains to military alliances. Now, let me turn to Tennessee and the election results that have been generating discussion. State-level elections often get overshadowed by national politics, but they're incredibly important because they directly affect governance, policy implementation, and serve as bellwethers for national trends. What happens in Tennessee doesn't stay in Tennessee. It signals shifts in voter sentiment that can predict broader movements. Without getting into specific candidates or races, what matters most is what these results tell us about voter priorities right now. Are voters focused primarily on economic issues, education, healthcare, public safety? The answer isn't uniform across the state, and that's actually one of the most interesting aspects. Tennessee, like many states, has significant urban-rural divides, different demographic compositions in different regions, and varying economic conditions depending on location. One of the key outcomes we need to watch is how these election results influence policymaking in Tennessee over the coming years. Will there be shifts in education funding, changes to healthcare policy, new approaches to infrastructure investment? Elections have consequences, and those consequences play out in legislative sessions, budget negotiations, and regulatory decisions that affect people's daily lives. The significance of Tennessee's results extends beyond the state's borders because Tennessee has become something of a political laboratory in recent years. The state has seen population growth from migration, particularly to cities like Nashville, which brings new voters with potentially different priorities than longtime residents. How Tennessee navigates these demographic shifts could provide lessons for other states experiencing similar changes. Another dimension worth exploring is voter turnout and engagement. Were turnout numbers higher or lower than expected? Did certain demographic groups participate at different rates? These patterns tell us about political enthusiasm, the effectiveness of mobilization efforts, and whether voters feel their participation matters. Low turnout might signal apathy or satisfaction with the status quo. High turnout could indicate either excitement about candidates or deep concern about the direction of the state. The potential impacts on national politics are more subtle, but still significant. State-level officials often become national figures. Governors become presidential candidates. State legislators move to Congress. The talent pipeline in American politics runs through state capitals, so paying attention to who's winning elections in places like Tennessee helps us understand who might shape national debates 5 or 10 years from now. Let me also address how Tennessee's results might influence other states facing similar issues. If Tennessee voters embrace certain policy positions strongly, that sends a message to politicians in neighboring states or states with similar demographics. Political consultants study these results carefully, looking for winning messages and strategies they can replicate elsewhere. This is how political trends spread across the country, not through top-down mandates, but through observation and adaptation. Now, I want to shift to something that might seem less obviously political, but is actually deeply revealing about American culture and values right now. There's been a nationwide debate sparked by an essay written by a student in Oklahoma. I want to spend some time on this because it illustrates how ideas and controversies can cascade through our media ecosystem and what that tells us about ourselves. First, let's consider what it means that a student essay can generate national attention. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens because the essay touched on themes that resonate far beyond one classroom in Oklahoma. It happens because we live in an era of rapid information sharing where local stories can become national conversations within hours. And it happens because Americans are hungry for discussions about values, identity, and the direction of our society. The content of the essay matters, obviously, but so does the reaction to it. We're seeing responses from educators, parents, politicians, media commentators, and citizens across the political spectrum. This diversity of reaction is actually healthy in a democracy. It means people care about ideas and are willing to engage with them publicly. The question is whether that engagement is productive or simply polarizing. One possible outcome of this debate is that it leads to meaningful conversations in schools, homes, and communities about how we discuss difficult topics. Maybe this becomes a teaching moment about free expression, about respectful disagreement, about the difference between ideas we find challenging and ideas we find harmful. That would be a positive outcome, strengthening our civic culture. Another possibility is that this becomes just another front in ongoing culture wars, with people taking sides based on tribal affiliations rather than engaging with the substance of what was written. We've seen this pattern before. A local incident becomes a national symbol, and suddenly everyone has an opinion based on headlines rather than careful consideration of details and context. This outcome is less productive, but unfortunately quite common in our current media environment. The significance of this Oklahoma essay debate extends to questions about education itself. What should students be taught? How should teachers handle controversial topics? What's the appropriate balance between exposing students to diverse viewpoints and protecting them from potentially harmful content? These are questions without easy answers, and they vary depending on age, community standards, and educational philosophy. Parents across the country are watching this story and thinking about their own children's education. Some might feel validated in concerns they've had about curriculum or classroom discussions. Others might worry about censorship or the chilling of intellectual exploration. Both sets of concerns come from a place of caring about children's development and education, even though they lead to different conclusions about what should happen. Teachers are watching too, and for them this has professional implications. How much latitude do they have to allow student expression? What happens if a student writes something controversial? Do they get administrative support, or do they find themselves at the center of a firestorm? These practical considerations affect how teachers approach their work, and that ultimately affects students' educational experiences. The media's role in amplifying this story is worth examining as well. Why did this particular essay become national news? What editorial decisions led to that coverage? And what does it tell us about what media organizations think will capture audience attention? Understanding these dynamics helps us be more sophisticated consumers of news and more thoughtful participants in public debates. Let me connect these three stories together because I think there are common threads worth exploring. All three involve questions about American identity, values, and direction. The Trump 2028 discussions are fundamentally about what kind of country we want to be and who we trust to lead us there. The Tennessee elections reflect choices about state-level governance, but also broader questions about political alignment. The Oklahoma essay debate touches on education, free expression, and cultural values. What unites these stories is that they're all forward-looking. Trump's comments are explicitly about the future. Elections are always about choosing the path ahead. And debates about education are ultimately about preparing the next generation. Americans right now are engaged in a collective process of deciding what comes next, and that process is messy, contentious, and deeply important. One of the challenges we face is that these conversations often happen in separate silos. People interested in national politics might not pay attention to state elections. Those focused on education debates might tune out economic policy discussions. But in reality, everything is connected. Economic conditions affect education funding. State-level politics influence national trends. Cultural debates shape the political landscape. The possible scenarios ahead depend partly on how well we can integrate these different strands of American life into a coherent vision. Can we have economic policies that create prosperity while also funding excellent education? Can we have political leaders who respect democratic norms while also being effective advocates for their policy positions? Can we have robust debates about values without descending into personal attacks and tribal warfare? I'm not naive about the challenges here. American politics has always been contentious. Our history is full of bitter disputes, close elections, and fundamental disagreements about the country's direction. What's different now is perhaps the speed and intensity of our information environment. Stories that might once have taken weeks to percolate through the national consciousness now explode in hours. Controversies that might have remained local become nationwide debates before anyone has time to fully understand the facts. This acceleration has both benefits and costs. The benefit is that more voices can be heard, that injustices can be exposed quickly, that important ideas can spread rapidly. The cost is that we sometimes react before we understand, that complexity gets flattened into sound bites, that nuance becomes a casualty of the need for clear positioning. As we look at these trending topics, Trump's 2028 plans, Tennessee's elections, the Oklahoma essay, we should ask ourselves what kind of public discourse we want to have. Do we want to engage deeply with complexity, or do we want simple narratives? Do we want to understand those who disagree with us, or do we want to defeat them? Do we want to find common ground, or do we want to win at all costs? These aren't easy questions, and I don't have definitive answers. But I think the act of asking them is valuable. It forces us to be intentional about our civic participation rather than simply reactive. It encourages us to think about our role in shaping these debates rather than just consuming them passively. Looking ahead to the coming months, each of these stories will continue developing. We'll learn more about Trump's actual plans for 2028 as actions either align with or diverge from current rhetoric. We'll see how Tennessee implements whatever mandate voters provided in these elections. And we'll watch whether the Oklahoma essay debate leads to substantive changes in how education handles controversial topics or simply fades as the next controversy emerges. The impacts will be both direct and indirect. Direct impacts include policy changes, political realignments, and specific decisions made by institutions. Indirect impacts include shifts in public opinion, changes in what's considered acceptable discourse, and the long-term effects of how we handle these moments of national attention. For citizens trying to make sense of all this, my advice is to maintain both engagement and perspective. Stay informed, but don't let the constant churn of news and controversy overwhelm you. Have opinions, but hold them lightly enough to adjust when you learn new information. Participate in these debates, but remember that those who disagree with you are also Americans trying to navigate these complex issues. The strength of American democracy has always been its ability to channel conflict into productive change rather than destructive chaos. We argue passionately, we compete fiercely, but ultimately we share a commitment to constitutional governance and peaceful transfer of power. These trending topics test that commitment because they touch on deep values and high stakes. As I close, I want to emphasize that these are not isolated events. They're part of an ongoing American conversation about who we are and who we want to be. That conversation has been happening since the founding, and it will continue long after these specific controversies fade. What matters is that we approach it with good faith, intellectual honesty, and a genuine commitment to understanding both facts and the values of those with whom we disagree. The next few years will be consequential. The decisions made about economic policy will affect prosperity and opportunity. The outcomes of elections will determine governance at every level. The resolution of debates about education and values will shape the next generation. We're all participants in this process, whether we recognize it or not. The question is whether we'll be thoughtful, informed, engaged participants, or passive consumers of whatever narratives others create for us. Thank you for your attention today. These topics deserve serious consideration, and I hope this analysis has provided some useful frameworks for understanding what's happening and what it might mean. The future is never certain, but by paying attention, thinking critically, and engaging constructively, we can help shape it in positive directions. That's the work of citizenship, and it's never been more important than it is right now.
H.